let's talk about white balance. Now, white balance is the color balance inside of your camera. It literally means that your camera is trying to offset or balance the color of light that is being cast on your image to make your whites appear white. For example, this shirt that I'm wearing right now is white, but it doesn't look white in this image because I don't have the white balance set correctly in my camera. All light sources have a color temperature that is measured in the units of Kelvin on a scale from 2500 to 10,000. 2500 being very warm red light, like the kind of light you would see from a sunset or that would be given off by indoor light bulbs, and 10,000 being very cool blue light, like the kind of light you would see if you were to point your camera at a perfectly blue sky at midday. And 5600 Kelvin is the temperature of sun at noonday. Now as clouds start to roll in, that'll change your color temperature to a more blue hue, and at night by the moonlight your color temperature is going to be more around 4000. Now your sunrises and your sunsets are going to be anywhere from 25 to 3500, and most indoor light bulbs are going to be around 3000. So the light that is shining on me right now is coming from my window, which is daylight, so it's 5600 Kelvin. But my camera is set to 2500 Kelvin, which means I'm telling my camera there's a very red light shining on me, so I need you to put a bunch of blue light into the image to equal it out and to balance out that color. However, this light isn't really red, but somewhere in the middle, so by putting it too blue in my camera, it creates this blue tint on me. So now I'm going to set the camera to 5600 Kelvin to where it should be so that my whites become white. Now my color balance is correctly set at 5600 Kelvin to match the daylight that's coming in through the window. Now I'm going to show you an example of the camera set too warm by setting my camera to 10,000 Kelvin on the color balance. So now I'm telling my camera there's a lot of blue light coming in, so I need to overcompensate and pump in a bunch of red light into the camera. However, this is daylight, it's somewhere in the middle, so it's not that blue, so my camera has now overcompensated and has way too much orange or red tint in the image, and that's why it appears too warm. So now I'm going to set it back to 5600 Kelvin, and you can see we are now back to correct white balance. So that's what it means when it's talking about white balance or color temperature. Those all kind of mean the same thing, and it's all about trying to make your whites look white by adjusting the color balance on your camera. Now, our eyeballs have an auto white balancing system within them. And so as we see different shades of colors of light throughout the day, our eyes automatically adjust and auto white balance these colors that we see and always show our whites as true white. And the camera, a DSLR camera, has the same function, an auto white balancing function within it. However, it doesn't do as good of a job as our eyes do. It still does a pretty good job, but in certain situations like low light situations or with color cast or mixed lighting, it doesn't do as good of a job. And so I personally like to set my white balance manually so I avoid any issue of my camera guessing incorrectly. Now, if you don't feel comfortable manually doing it and don't quite understand how to set your white balance, then just set it to auto white balance and it'll do a pretty good job. Now, if you go into your camera, you'll see that the white balance function on your camera has a few presets built in for quickly adjusting your color balance for certain situations of light. Most cameras should have the following presets: daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten, white fluorescent, and flash. So I'm now going to show you a few examples of different photos I've taken during different lighting situations, and I'm going to apply each of the presets to each of the photos so you can see the effects it has on each. So first, let's do a daylight photo. Now your daylight should be somewhere between 52 and 5600 Kelvin, so this is the correct white balance for this photo. Now let's apply the shade preset, which is at about 7000 Kelvin. And you can see it's a little warm. You might prefer to have it that warm. Now let's put on the cloudy preset, a little bit closer to white balance. Now to tungsten, which is down to 3200 Kelvin, and now you can see that it makes it very blue tint. Far too blue for correct white balance. And white fluorescent preset is at about 4000 Kelvin. And then flash, which is at about 6000 Kelvin. So now let's move on to a cloudy photo. You can see this overcast day. So the correct white balance should be our cloudy preset at 6000 Kelvin. Now let's go down to tungsten at 3200, and you can see it's far too blue. Or we go up to shade, and it's a little bit too orange. So you can see as you go from different presets, the effects it has on each of these images, and the reason why they've put these presets at the temperatures they have. Here's an example of an indoor. So it's probably correctly set at tungsten, which is 3200 Kelvin. And you can see that that's about what our eye would see if we were in that room. But if you had it set to shady or daylight, you can see that it's far too orange. So for most indoor lighting situations, you're probably going to want to be more around 3,000 to 4,000, depending on the light bulbs that you have and the amount of sun you have casting into your image. So now let's go to a night shot, and like we talked about before, moonlight is around 4,000 Kelvin. So let's click on the white fluorescent preset, which is about moonlight, and you can see that that's about right as far as our whites being white. If we were to come up here and do shade or cloudy or daylight, you can see that those are all a little bit too warm of an image. So for a lot of night shots, you're going to want to be around 4,000 Kelvin for those. Now let's go to an example of me standing in the shade. This is in the middle of the day, but there's no direct sunlight. This is completely shaded. And so our preset of shade at 7,000 Kelvin is going to give you the most accurate color balance to show what our eyes were actually seeing when we were standing there. If we were to go down to tungsten at 3,200 Kelvin, you see it makes it far too blue. And if we go up to cloudy or daylight, those are pretty accurate as well. But if you were there, you would know that setting this to 7,000 Kelvin gives you the most correct color balance. Now, you don't always want to set your camera to the correct white balance. What I mean by that is if you were to set your camera to auto white balance for this image on a sunrise, then your camera would tell you, hey, this light that's being cast is at 3,200 Kelvin, and so this is where we should be. And as you can see, your auto white balance will be reading it incorrectly, because yes, it is making your whites white in this case, but it's not giving an accurate reading of what your eyes actually saw, and it's kind of defeating the purpose of shooting at a golden hour or a sunset because it's overcompensating for the orange hue and trying to equal it out somewhere. So for instances like this, I don't necessarily want to follow the rules of white balance. I want to follow the rules of what looks best to me and what matches what my eyes see. Because again, you have to remember that auto white balance and what your camera thinks is correct isn't always correct. And having been there, I can tell you that cloudy or 6,000 Kelvin gives a more accurate reading on the color of the image I was actually seeing with my eyes. So even though 6,000 Kelvin is much higher than what a sunset is reading and what your camera is going to want to read, that's about the color temperature I'd use for a sunset or a sunrise, because that's what's going to give it a warm, colorful glow or tint. So as a rule of thumb, I always try and set my white balance or my color balance according to as I see it with my own eyes. And sometimes I actually want to set it different than what I see with my own eyes if what I'm seeing with my own eyes isn't very appealing or attractive. A case where I'd want to do this is maybe indoor lighting when there's a really yellow, gross tint to an image. Instead of setting the color balance to match what my eyes are seeing, I'll say, you know what? I don't like what I'm seeing with my eyes, so I'm going to change the color balance to try and make this look a little bit more appealing in my camera. Or for instance, if you're shooting in the middle of the day when the sun's beating directly down upon you and the lighting is kind of harsh and it's not very colorful, instead of setting my camera to 5,600 Kelvin to match the midday light, a lot of times I'll go a little bit warmer to 6,000 or 6,500 so that I can give my image more of a golden hour sunset look even though it's not golden hour. So that's kind of a way to cheat, to add a little bit more color, a little bit more warmth to your image. So as you can see, by changing your white balance, you can either get a correct white balance like your eyes would see, or you can create a desired look by adding warmer or cooler hues. So that's about it for white balance. If you guys have any questions, let me know.